Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And I'm continuing my series of great Seattle bands that you probably never heard of. And I put a lot of the weirder bands at first and some of the older bands, but now I'm kind of getting into bands that were kind of big during the grunge era. And another one of them is a group called Son of Man. And they have some connections with Blind Horse because Mike Patterson was a guitar player in Blind Horse and Son of Man. Son of Man formed in 1990, and they were Brad Cock on vocals, Mike Patterson on guitar, Nick Hornbuckle on bass, and Tal Goetling on drums. And they put out a number of demo tapes. They put out a demo tape in 1989, one in 1991, one in 1992, and there's some copies floating around out there. I found one of their demo tapes posted on YouTube, which I'll post below. But another band that was well worth it, and as I pointed out so many times, a lot of these bands have all these different connections. Blind Horse, of course, had a bass player from Green River and Mother Love Bone, and later Pearl Jam, and Rich Stuberud was in the Fastbacks and War Babies. Greg Gilmore was in 10 Minute Warning, Chubby Children, and about 100 other bands. And so Son of Man were around for a pretty decent amount of time. They played a lot of live shows, and they were always great. Just like Blind Horse was always excellent. Son of Man was really excellent, and just another one that used kind of the same elements. They were equally influenced by a lot of punk bands, and then were also interested in Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, and then came up with this sound. And I'm always amazed when I listen to a lot of these Seattle bands. A lot of them are really good, had a great musicianship, generally had some pretty great singers and really good material. But there was definitely a sound in Seattle at that time, and a lot of these bands kind of had a similar feel. And so bands like Mudhoney and Soundgarden and Tad kind of rose to the top because they were even more distinctive. But a lot of these bands had all the same elements going on and should have made it and should have had a record out. And Son of Man is a perfect example of that. They were together from 1989 to 1992 and managed to get a 45 out in 1991, The Dummy and Me. And Brad Cock also ended up forming another notorious Seattle band called Pothead, and I'll be doing a separate video on that. But and previous to Son of Man, there was a band called East and West, and that's a couple of members ended up in Pothead, but I'll get into that later. But Son of Man are really cool, and if you just can't get enough of that Seattle sound and that grunge thing, they're definitely one of the better bands of many. There were so many great bands in Seattle at that time. Every time you went to a show, you'd see a band you'd never heard of, or a band eventually that you would have seen 10 or 12 times. And I saw 10, Son of Man probably 10 times, and they were always great. And they just got more professional as it went on. Their material got better as it went on. And Brad Cock was a great vocalist. Mike Patterson was a great guitar player, and had some elements of bands like Skin Yard and a little bit of Soundgarden. And so there's a lot of cross fertilization in a lot of these Seattle bands, and a lot of competition. And Son of Man should have been one of the ones that made it. I did actually get to see their last incarnation after the Chubby Children broke up in '92. Son of Man had a record label showcase, so they almost got signed at a local club called the Rock Candy. And at that particular show, Mike Patterson was on guitar. It was supposed to be Brad Cock on vocals, but he didn't make it. And then the rhythm section was Paul Hinklin and Greg Gilmore. Of course, Greg Gilmore keeps popping up. So after he was out of Chubby Children in '92, he joined Son of Man briefly and brought along Paul Hinklin from Sad Happy. And it was a thundering show. Mike Patterson was a killer guitar player, and they had pretty much the ultimate Seattle rhythm section with Gilmore and Hinklin. But alas, without the singer, it wasn't quite as distinctive, and they didn't get signed based on that gig. And so it was all over after that. And worked out well for me, like so many of these videos I'm talking about, because Paul Hinklin was no longer in Son of Man, and I hooked up with him in '96 and formed another band. And I also played with Greg Gilmore several times over the years after that as well. So what an incestuous bunch we are. But check out the demos I posted below. Well worth it. If you love that Seattle sound, you can't get enough grunge. You want to hear another really killer band. And as I pointed out, that's one of the things that makes it so interesting. I lived in this town during all those years, and I saw 50 bands like this, and most of them were pretty good. And Son of Man were definitely one of the better ones, too. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.